Hi, Shima.
Hi.
How are you?
I'm so good.
Good. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
We're really excited to have this conversation with you. I wonder if you wouldn't mind, to get us started, just telling us a little bit about your personal background, about your family, any stories that come to mind. I know, and I think it'll become clear how that sort of ties into the topic at hand. But if you could just introduce yourself to the audience a little bit, that would be great.
So I immigrated from Iran to the United States. I was 7, had no exposure to Christ, Christianity, anything when I was little. And my mom was a political activist in Iran. She was very much like took upon herself the problems that she saw in society and decided to first fight for a revolution against the Shah of Iran to create freedom. Then, because of the vacuum of power and lots of different competing groups, the group that ended up taking power was a theocracy. It's the Islamic Republic of Iran, and it's been that since 1979. And for my mom, who was, kind of in the center of this hotbed of fighting for revolution and freedom, she saw this change and was like, no, like this isn't what we fought for. And a lot of people just left. So most Iranians that were educated and had the opportunity left. But my parents, my dad was a doctor, my mom was very educated woman, it wasn't good enough for her. She was like, I'm not leaving. I'm going to try to make it better. And so she risked her life basically to fight for freedom in our country, and ended up being sentenced to prison for 10 years through miraculous circumstances. My dad basically saved her. She was able to serve only 2.5 years from her 10-year sentence. And so that was kind of my first exposure to prison as a 2.5-year-old. I think my mom was ripped away from me. I was sitting on her lap at a little family party, and these men with machine guns burst into my home and arrest my mom and my dad's sister, who was living with us and kind of helping my mom with the revolutionary stuff. And they took her, no trial, like all the legal stuff that I learned about now. I'm like, this is the worst. I mean, horrible prison conditions. And then she has this dream in Iran that she sees these fall colors, and she knows that she's in America in her dream, and she's in prison in Iran. And she's like, how is this possible? And so through some intense miracles with my dad and being able to get out of Iran during the war. So at this point, it's Iran-Iraq war. And there's fighting, that we're not getting a lot of things in. So as a kid, I mean, the way I notice it, it's like I go to the candy store, like there's no candy to buy, right? There's no soda. Every once in a while there's soda and candy. And so it's, and then obviously we're in the basement with gas, with towels over our faces because Saddam Hussein is bombing Iran. There was a lot of real traumatic things as a kid. And then we were, basically whisked through miracles to America, where my dad was able to find a job at UCLA, like a volunteer job as a neurosurgeon. He was doing a research position. I know. And then miraculously, a woman introduced us to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints.
Once you're in LA.
Once we're in LA, and quite literally changed our lives, because we were supposed to be there for 1 year and go back to Iran because we had permission to stay for this 1-year fellowship. And because we found the church, my mom's like, I'm not going back because they'll kill me. And they would, they have killed people. I know people recently who have been killed from converting from Islam to Christianity. So it was very real worry that she had. And she said, I'm not going back. And then through miracles, my dad was able to become a doctor in the US after, years of kind of struggling.
Wow. So it sounds, based on that story, like the religious affiliation is actually more dangerous than the political leanings. Is that right?
Yes, absolutely. I think because my mom was released on probation, so she wasn't supposed to leave the country. That's one miracle, as we got out without them noticing that she was on probation and not able to leave the country for the remainder of her sentence. So when we went back to Iran, they actually detained her passport, and it was kind of an issue in 99 when we went back. So this was 86 we left, and 13 years later, that's the first time we ever went back. But yeah, the bigger issue would have been converting from Islam. That's punishable by death. Yeah. So
how I'm not sure what the word is. How devoted of Muslims were your parents before conversion?
That's a great question. Very much so. I remember learning to pray as a little girl, and I still admire it so much. And it's one of those kind of internal consistencies with the Book of Mormon, because when you think about how the King Benjamin's people, like the old ancient Israelites, like they would just kind of lay down fully, like put their heads down and put their hands out. And that's how you pray in Judaism and Islam and these old religions, right? And it's like, how would Joseph Smith have known that, right? But I remember praying with my head down on the floor, and then you sit up and you kneel and then you stand up, and there's all of this and this kind of kneeling and sitting and laying down. I just feel like it's something I grew up doing. And so when you read in the Book of Mormon, I'm like, oh, that's so neat. I mean, it's something I grew up loving, to just kind of the active prayer that we did in Islam. And So,
yeah.
yeah.
Oh
So you were 9 when you first came to the U.S.
7.
Oh, 7.
Yes, 7.
Okay. And converted when you were
Yeah, we found the church within 6 months.
Within 6
through
months.
this miraculous
okay.
woman.
So were you baptized at 8?
I was baptized at 8.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow.
So yeah,
Oh,
my sister was
incredible.
baptized when we first came. I think she was 9
Okay.
with my mom, and then I was able to be baptized the year after.
Do you remember having sort of like religious feelings of your own at that age, or were you just sort of like going with the flow of what your parents were doing?
Yeah, it's hard to say. I mean, I definitely remember. There's something to that age of accountability, this 8-year-old, because I do remember like feeling, different getting baptized. I remember being so excited to get baptized, and it wasn't for any reason. Like, it's not like I got anything out of it, right? Like, it's not like you get toys or there was no kid incentives, candies. I didn't. I mean, maybe some of you do. My kids probably will, but back in those days, like, I didn't. And I just remember like we just felt this feeling, all of us, right? My mom felt it like first time she's at a Christmas party, she sees a pamphlet. How can my family be together forever? And she reads it and she's like, she just knew implicitly, like intuitively, like the truth just resonated with her because it was true. And I remember as a kid, like I remember going to church, and before I was even baptized, like we'd sing hymns, and I like felt something. I knew I felt something. I didn't even understand the words, you guys. Like I went to school and I knew 2 words from Iran. My mom and dad were like, okay, you just need 2 words because you don't speak any. I'm in 2nd grade.
That's incredible.
Like do you guys have a 2nd grader? It's like I have a 2nd grader. And it's like, I can't even imagine him not speaking any words and going to school. Yeah. And so I went to school, and it's like, I didn't speak any words. I like would get yes and no wrong, but I remember going to church and I felt the Spirit. Like I knew that it was good. I knew this was right. And so anyway, I think there's something to that age, right? That age where you click to be accountable, because I felt very much like I made this choice to join this church. Yeah. And at the time it was, my dad was a little not as interested. So I definitely could have chosen not to be part of it. But we all were eager to join the church, when we were kids. Yeah.
Did your dad convert eventually?
He joined the church, but he never was active. He was smoking ever since he was 9 and just felt like this guilt coming to church, even though, I mean, obviously, like, you're accepted if you smoke or not. We all have sins, and those are different sins, like those ones are more visible than other sins. But I just think he felt the guilt. And also culturally, I think it was difficult for him. Yeah. Our family was very devout, his family and my mom's in Islam. And so I think it was difficult for them to kind of transition to another kind of faith. It's so different.
It seems like this is so interesting. It feels to me like your story is all about just these contrasts and this tension, and like, being I'm sure that there was a lot of anti-Americanism in the air when you were little and growing up, and then to come and this is your new home, and same with Christianity. Like, I'm sure that those were tensions that you were aware, maybe not aware of. I don't know, but it must have been in the air, and it feels like you're still sort of in those spaces where there's just like discomfort. And
I think that's such a good point. And I think it is very indicative of kind of like the people of Iran versus the government, or say like people of the Middle East versus the government. Because I remember going to school and every single day I'd have to say, death to America, death to Israel, death to Saddam Hussein, Magba America, Magba Israel, Magba. And I'm like, I didn't know what I was saying. I didn't believe those things. But the minute my parents were like, we're going to America, we're like, okay, this sounds great. Like they want to go. Wow. Like we didn't know anything. We had no media exposure to anything American, right? The only thing I knew about is Michael Jackson, because my my first grade cousin got kicked out of school because he somehow got a Michael Jackson pin and he like put it on his shirt and got kicked out of school for that, like suspended for a week. Wow. So it was like, we did not have any exposure. Like I didn't watch cartoons, like we didn't have any of it. But I remember just my parents just telling us there's this other place we could go. So I think intuitively we knew that freedom somewhere that we could make more choices was a good thing. And so I think, even as a kid, it was just kind of like a natural thing.
Wow. I'm curious. So our friend Thomas McConkie, do you know Thomas by any chance?
I don't know him. I'd love to. I know his work.
You two should know each other for sure.
I would love to meet him. Yeah.
So he, he grew up in a very LDS family, and sort of like left for a while and became really deeply Buddhist. And I'm a little bit nervous to tell Thomas's story for him. But, is now a practicing Latter-day Saint, deeply influenced by his Buddhist experience. I'm curious if you see yourself in the same way at all. Like, are there traditions or rituals or influences of any kind that you sort of carry forward from your Islamic background?
Yes. I mean, some of the most beautiful things, words. I mean, there's so many, like the prayer, I think kind of trying to humble myself in prayer. I think some people have a lot of problems with modesty. And I think actually my Islamic background helps me to have this beautiful like peace with it, because in Islam, modesty is not for women. It's for men and women. So like a man will get, you know, as equally in trouble if he wears a short sleeve shirt or shorts as a woman does for wearing shorts or her hair covered. The only difference is like the covering of the hair is different, but even men will wear hats, like they cover their heads. So the kind of like ritual things like that, where the covering of the head, obviously we cover our heads in the temple as a sign of humility. Like I see it as that less than, you know, some people culturally now looking at it, it's like, oh, it's men oppressing women. It's like, no, that's humility to God for men and women. So it's funny that Islam would have taught me this, like this like appreciation and love of modesty, whereas some people see it as like this thing oppressing women. I'm just like, no, I see it as, you know, so I'll give you an example, like my husband, who's, you know, not Muslim, didn't grow up Muslim at all. He's a, you know, person that grew up in America. And so he came to my house, and I remember my parents have a pool. After, you know, all the years of hardship, now they've like retired on the beach, and it's this beautiful place. They live in San Clemente, and it's awesome. But they have this pool at their house. And I remember my husband like walked in to get a snack, you know, with his shirt off, and he was kind of like walking around a little longer. And my mom like doesn't know what to say. She's just like, oh, like, like, and she just is like, Shima, like, you know, can you tell your husband like put his shirt on? Like it's immodest, you know?
Wow.
And so it's like, that is like the culture I grew up with. And I actually appreciate it, because I think, you know, men wear garments and cover their chests as women do too. I just think that kind of appreciation, it's like, there's so many things like that I appreciate from my background.
Thanks for sharing that. Yeah.
Wow. That's so interesting. So take us through your growing up years, and when did you become interested in all of this work that you've been involved in the last, how long?
I mean, at least 15 years I've been doing teaching, but I've also kind of been a lawyer before that, doing some criminal defense work and things. But so let's see, I think my sister and I both, my older sister and I, because of what we saw my mom do, and even though it was like very shameful in my family that my mom went to prison, like no one talks of it. No one's like, isn't Narima so brave? She went to prison against, because even though they don't love the government, I just think it's still shameful in our culture that she went. But my sister and I, even though no one ever told us this was brave and amazing that our mom went to prison to fight for her freedoms, like we felt this, like we knew this. And I don't know how, it's like almost like these intuitive truths that you just know as a kid. And so anyway, both of us had this innate desire to serve our country, and we felt like we've been brought by miracles to this land, like we got to do something, we got to like make it worthwhile, like help others in some way. And so I felt very much compelled towards helping the least among us, and some of those are people incarcerated. And I saw how unfairly my mom was treated, and I thought, you know, could I help others that are incarcerated and treated poorly? And you know, my major in undergrad was sociology. Like I always thought, okay, I want to help solve social problems, like what can I do to make this better? You know? Wow. Yeah.
I'm curious, actually, as you say that, I'm just wondering if the Book of Mormon, the sort of like founding story of the Book of Mormon, Lehi's family, has resonated with you in particular because of its echoes of your own family.
So much. It's like a scripture I remember. It's 2 Nephi, I think 1:5, where he talks like about that they were brought by the hand of the Lord to this promised land. And I feel very much so that we were brought by the hand of the Lord. And anyone brought here, either now or in previous generations as immigrants, we all were brought to this promised land. And the reason why it's promised is because we have these freedoms. We have this free agency. We have this ability to choose. We have, you know, the frameworks for a place where we can worship God freely. And I'm so grateful. I mean, I definitely feel like I relate to Lehi.
Very cool. Very cool. Would you mind telling us a little bit about this work that you've done over the past 15 years?
I think, you know, there's been kind of an evolution. I was going to tell you about that, because I feel like for like a lot of us, I kind of compartmentalize like my faith. It's like, I'm a faithful person. I try to keep my covenants. I go to church, but then there's like my work where I'm trying to like achieve. And so I ended up doing criminal law after doing a Fulbright in Malawi. And I saw pretrial detention conditions there were horrible. And then I was like, well, what is it like in the US? And I noticed through research, and this was when I first got to BYU in 2010. I was there for 3 years before I went to the University of Utah for 10. And I was like, this is a real problem. Like we're detaining a lot of people before trial, and they're not getting the chance to keep their jobs and meet with their lawyers in the US. Yeah. And it was actually worse than it was in Malawi, because, you know, we have a lot more of an incarceration problem than anywhere in the world. We incarcerate more people, you know, per capita than anywhere. I mean, California incarcerates more people than the rest of the world. It's insane how much more we incarcerate. And so I was thinking, you know, could we get to the earlier parts of this and look at pre-trial detention, where it's like you're charged, could you just let people out more readily than detaining them? And then they're less likely to lose their job and their housing situation and their kids, you know, child support and all of that. And then could they, you know, then be likely to be able to not get a carceral sentence, so that they wouldn't be put in prison, and just kind of like stop them from going to prison in the first place. Like I was thinking, you know, at that time, a lot of people were looking at sentencing reform, but I was like, I want to look at the earlier phase because that feels like more preventative. Anyway.
And how long is that earlier phase? Like, I don't, if for someone who doesn't know very much about the system, like how long might someone be in that kind of limbo?
In the US, it's usually not longer than a year, but usually it'll be 6 months. I mean, if it's a murder, well, for a year, yes, if it's murder, waiting. Oh, absolutely. Wow. Yeah. I mean, if it's a complicated murder case, yes, most people are under 6 months. There's a speedy trial act where we try to be quicker. Okay. But yeah.
And how does this interact? I'm so sorry for my complete ignorance here, but with the bail system, is this people who cannot, there is a possibility of bail, but they can't post it? Or?
Yes. And so this is the thing I decided to focus on is the bail system, which is like, you know, that decision that the judge gets to make. Do you get released while we're figuring out your trial, or are you detained? And it's like, you know, from 1 month to a year, basically, you'll be detained in jail before they determine your outcome. Did you get convicted or not? And so that's what I decided to focus on is, could we get more people out? Because when you think of jail overcrowding, that is the problem. It's pretrial detention. It's bail. That is the problem. Yeah. So you think of like, everyone's like, oh, we need to build more jails. We need more jail beds. It's because more people are being held pretrial and they're not being kind of put in prison or released depending on the outcome. Wow. So I started looking at this, and I was kind of in my naivety, right? And I was at BYU and then I was at U, same thing, but all I was focused on was policy solutions. I was like, okay, how we need to fix this is a 3-pronged approach. One involving the judiciary, one involving the executive branch, and one involving the legislature. And we can deal with all these different people. And so I would do these research projects, you know, as you write academic articles. I even wrote a book for Cambridge on this, and I'm kind of writing. And basically in 10 years, all of my solutions are, how do we get legislation? How do we get judges to look at data? So if they're looking, for instance, right, judges, I did in one of my first projects, we realized that they're detaining people that are, you know, charged with drug crimes, for instance. But, you know, counterintuitively, people that are charged with drug crimes are actually not dangerous at all. They're as safe to release pretrial as people that have been brought in on a felony driving offense. It's like, okay, you drove way too fast kind of thing. They're very safe. They actually don't like to commit crimes because it's like a business. Drugs in America are a business, right? It's like people that, that sell drugs and are in manufacturing of drugs it's more like a business than it is a violent enterprise is what we think. So anyway, so I'm doing all this research, all this data basically, and thinking like I'm making a huge difference, right? And for a while I think I am. I'll have to tell you that because for like I get an op-ed placed in the New York Times in 2010, which is unheard of. It's like a bucket list item, happens like within my first year at BYU. It is amazing, but I'll tell you because it ends in failure. So I'm only bragging to show I failed. But so I have that. Lots of other people start writing about bail. Like it becomes the third wave of bail reform. There's a couple agencies working on it, but like tons of scholars. And I have to admit, like better than me, like at top law schools, writing better articles, placing better articles, but everyone's talking about bail all of a sudden.
And is this at the state level mostly?
This is at the state level. Okay. Yeah. I know. I mean, there's a little bit of federal, but bail is state. Okay. Because crime is state. Yeah. Crime, the most important crimes happen at state levels. Only a few crimes are federal. So it is really like we're dealing with states. And so, during this 10 years from, I guess, 2012 till about, I don't know, 2018 or so, there's like hundreds of bills passed all over the country, right? Wow. There's hundreds pending, like so much change happens in bail reform. But what's sad about it and where it ends up in failure is, I first got the clue when I did a presentation for federal judges, and I was talking to them about my research, and I'm like, listen, so we have all this great data that will show you who to release and who to detain, who's safe to release. Because a lot of people they were detaining were very safe to release. So we were like, look, we can show you through 15 years and hundreds of thousands of defendants that these people are so safe to release. Like you should be able to release them. And I remember, one judge is sitting back and being like, well, this is all interesting, but I'm just going to go with my gut. That's what I'm going to do. And I'm like, oh man, so that was my first inkling. And then fast forward. So 2020, crime rates go up in America. I don't know if you guys noticed that. Yeah. It was a slight uptick. And now people still think we're living in this crazy, dangerous place. But really, it was just like a couple years uptick in crime. Okay.
You're saying pandemic driven,
yes.
Probably?
I mean, we don't know why.
Yeah.
I remember, I don't know what was the uptick. It's hard to say because it was all over the country. But for a couple of years, we had a slight uptick. Nothing like we had in the 90s, nothing like we had in 2015. It was just like a slight uptick because crime's been going down. You might not know this. People don't know this because it's like everyone just thinks that everything's so bad because you read in the papers. But crime's actually steadily been going down since 2007.
Okay.
And then we just had a slight uptick in 2020. Everyone's like, crime, let's start.
Yeah.
So anyway, that slight uptick led to basically all the work I've done and all the other fun bail scholars that I have across the country, all my friends, in retracting. Like most states and cities retracted all the bail reform they did. Even Utah kind of peeled it back. Like, and so I just felt like, what am I doing? What am I doing with my life? Why am I spending all this time in public policy? And meanwhile, I have to say, so I have a colleague who teaches, her name's Jocelyn Simonson. And I remember I'm kind of a senior colleague to her. And I remember she invited me out and was like, so great, all this bail work you're doing, I'm doing it too. And what she decided to focus on was communities and how communities and individuals impact bail reform. And in my, non-pride or non-humble, like my very prideful heart, I'm thinking, that's cute, like communities, like that sounds fun. But like really what the change is going to be is with executive branch and that's like the big change, structural change. Right. That's what we need to do. Jocelyn, Nick, what are you doing? And no, but I have like this come to Jesus moment because in 2022, she gives me her book to read. And I'm like in tears reading it because her book is called Radical Acts of Justice. And what she recounts is all these communities. And who are these communities? Who are these individuals that are coming? It's faith groups. And so I'm like so touched because I'm like, she's not even religious as far as I know. She's just like this, great secular scholar. And I'm like reading this book and I'm like, oh my goodness. So she talks about this reverend in Louisiana who shows up with her congregants in a Louisiana courtroom. And basically what they do is minister to people sitting at this bail hearing, right? And what happens is like, these are really depressing hearings. I don't know if you've ever seen a bail hearings, but you show up and the person is usually unrepresented. They have no friends there. They have no family there. And the judge will say to them, do you have money for a lawyer? And do you have money for bail? And they'll say no. And they'll try to explain. And the judge will just be like, you're not allowed to speak. Like they're silenced in these hearings. Like it is the most horrible thing to watch. But what is amazing is this reverend and her congregants would come and watch, and they would sit there representing these individuals, not as a lawyer, but as a friend, like as a person who's like, I'm with you. Yeah. I'm not with the system. I'm here to witness this. And they call it court watching. But it's like, we're just here. We have no skills as lawyers, but we're just here as witnesses. It's like ministering, right? Like we don't have any special skills. We're regular people just witnessing. Like, and sometimes it is like that. You go to witness somebody that's going through a hard thing. It's like, I'm here. I have no words, but I love you.
Well, that's amazing. How do they communicate that to I don't know if defendant is the right word yet.
Defendant. Yeah,
defendant. Okay, so like I'm imagining in a courtroom, and I apologize. I know so little about this.
No,
but like there's some physical separation between these people. And so how do they like interact?
Some of them were doing it during Zoom. It was during COVID. But I mean, they would be on the camera and they would just like communicate. And the defendant, who's never seen anyone else in the room, it's always them and the judge. Like they notice this person and they're announced as a court watcher. This is Reverend Anderson here. But in a regular courtroom, they would sit right by them. And that's the most beautiful. And this happens all over the country. So Utah has this, Chicago, Louisiana, like all these different jurisdictions. And so she writes about this beautiful practice. And the most amazing thing that I saw in this book, and I'm just like blown away, is these judges, right? Same judges that I'm talking to that are like, nah, go away. Yeah. Professor Baughman, right? But she writes about these judges, and they, in the days that they show up in these courts, because there's some days they don't have a person there, the judges set 50% less bail amounts for these people, giving them a greater chance to get released, greater chance to pay their bail, just more mercy. That's incredible. More love. And it's like, of course that's the right way. It's like, how did I as a Christian not notice that the right way is one by one? It's by the community. It's by faith, right? It's by mercy, like the Christ-like mercy that you see. That's the change. It's not through the, I mean, yes, I'm not saying like I would take away the legislative work, but like this is like the real work. This is what's effective. It's a changing of a heart of a judge, not telling them through data that what they're doing is wrong.
Well, and Jesus told us this like so explicitly. It's like it's not a mystery.
Right.
But we don't. I mean, I'm totally guilty of ignoring that particular injunction completely.
Well, well, I was just gonna add, and Jonathan Haidt, like we talk about him all the time, but this is like like this is exactly what he says too. That in addition to Jesus, it is a hard decision, and then you justify it with the data, but like not the other way around.
The Righteous Mind, is that one of your favorite books? I recommend it to most people I know. Like you have to read this book.
It sounds like that's exactly what's happening.
That's
it changes the heart.
What's happening. And I I don't know how I didn't realize that, because it's like, I know the prophet around that time said the answer is always Jesus Christ. And that was just kind of going in my head as a scholar. I'm like, and it made me just question all of my work. I'm like, what am I doing? And so that's why I started praying and ended up back at BYU doing this new work. So I was kind of a criminal law professor focused on bail and violent crime and police and, you know, all these things. And then I just thought, but I really want to focus on how I want to study this, because, you know, my colleague had just happened upon these faith groups in her book, but no one's really studied them.
Okay, so she was sort of just taking it
was
anecdotally.
Just amongst the other community groups fighting for justice.
Wow.
And it was radical what they were able to achieve. But I was like, this is interesting. Like, people of faith are making a difference, and people of our faith make a huge difference, right? And you know, you think of LDS work, like in Utah prisons, the most active group of you know, religious group is LDS people. We spend thousands of hours a year in prisons. We're like the most organized. It's the most amazing thing to watch what we're doing in the prisons. We have general authorities. Did you guys know that? Charged over the prisons.
No,
really?
They show up at these transition branches when people are released from prison. They go up. I mean, they're in the prisons all the time. General authorities, right? 70s.
Amazing.
And it is amazing because we care that much about people that are incarcerated, and other faiths do too. There's so much good work going on with Buddhists, and Jehovah's Witnesses are doing amazing work. They're number 2, I think, in hours spent Bible study with the inmates. And I'm trying to study that now. So that's something I'm studying at BYU.
Wow. Yeah. So I imagine that there must be the other scholars continue to carry the ball forward from a public policy perspective, which is important.
I'm like, others can do that.
Yeah. But
they're better at it than I am anyway.
Yes, but you've changed your focus entirely now.
Yes.
Wow.
I've changed my focus because I want to study this, because no one else is studying it. No one's taking religion seriously, as I wasn't. And I just happened upon it. It's like, and then there was other stories I saw in the meanwhile too. There's some really cool stories in Boston. So often, and this is everywhere. So in crime, we all know, you know, criminal experts all know that crime happens with a very small subset of people. And it's like very, you know, focused in one specific area or several. In New York City, it'll be by the projects, but there's like 4 of them, and that's where all the crime happens. And so it actually is really easy to intervene if you want to. And the most effective interventions, there was one in Boston in the 90s where they cut murder rates by half, because the churches teamed up with the police officers, and they kind of worked to minister to this 1% of youth was causing all the murders, all the youth murders. It was like 1% of people. And so they could work with them, right? Like we mentor them, we love them, we teach them about Jesus. And it really transformed Boston in the 90s where murder was so high. And actually when the program fell apart, murder just went up. So we know it wasn't a result of just kind of natural fluctuations of crime or reductions of crime. It was actually this program. So that's the kind of stuff that gets me so excited, because I'm like, faith does matter, as you guys say, right?
Yeah.
Faith matters, and it matters in criminal justice.
Yeah.
Wow.
So
go ahead.
We've always talked about that. Something interesting about our faith tradition is that we divide geographically, but I'm wondering if you see that as sort of an obstacle, because I think it does also have the potential to make us a little insular. Yeah. And we're probably accidentally sorted pretty generally by socioeconomic status too. So does that mean that are you seeing that it's hard for wards to find places where they can be useful, and because it's very likely outside of your boundaries, you know, if these little spots are kind of isolated where all of the crime is happening, that's like whose ward is that? And like, you know, like what can other wards? That's a great point. How do you reach out?
I have so many ideas about that. I'm like, anyone that wants to do more work in this area, like reach out. But there's so many other branches and wards that you can help with, you know, as like a volunteer, if you have time. Like the prison ministry that our church does always needs volunteers. There's always people. They have people going in every single day, you guys, all day.
And is that I've met somebody who is just, it's a branch, like that is a branch, right?
Well, the jails. We're so organized I just love our structure. It's so many, but like
who's in charge?
There's a lot of, so your stake will likely have some sort of ministry like that. Our stake, for instance, has the veterans. And so that's our kind of like underserved population where we go help with, you know, the neighbor stake has the veterans halfway house. Other people have the prisons. Like, so their stake will be charged with that. And if they don't have, you know, then they can use multi-stake. But we do have people, I mean, we are definitely charged with all that. And I know in a lot of places, so like New York is like this, Provo, even when I was in Provo, they would try to cut the boundaries in the ward such that there are people that are kind of downtown, you know, kind of living in more difficult circumstances with people that are just more stable economically. So I think that is something that they try to address in the most amazing way that we do. I feel like it's so organized.
Right. In
so
the Mormon way.
Yeah, really. Yeah.
So I'm really curious. So it's been 2 or 3 years since you've sort of like made this shift of focus. Is that,
yeah,
am I getting that right?
Yes. It's been a few years of like researching this.
Yeah. And I was
it always
so
takes me like 3 years before I write anything, but
okay. That's what I was wondering about. If the research has formalized and if you've completed any studies or have preliminary results or anything like that.
Yes. I mean, only just little bits of other people's studies. And I'm writing some theoretical stuff about forgiveness in criminal justice. How do we kind of take some of these really cool religious symbols and things? So the one I'm writing right now, it's about, have you guys ever heard of the scapegoat ritual before?
I don't
This
think
is
so.
a really cool thing I found in a bail book, which is so great.
Okay.
So this amazing prominent bail activist, her name's Robin Steenberg, or you might know, or some people read it. It's called The Art of Compassion.
No,
a lot of people read it that aren't
Okay.
criminal. It's kind of one of those like it's like Just Mercy. It's like it bridged over the criminal nerds to like everyone's reading it. But anyway, she writes about this criminal defense trial that she had where she is Jewish, and it came to mind to talk about this Jewish ritual that they used to have. It's called the scapegoat ritual. And basically what it is like the community would come together and they would say like, at this point forward, one time a year, we're just going to let go of all the sins and crimes. And they would symbolize that by letting a goat go. So like they would get a goat from the community and the goat would go, and it was called the scapegoat, right?
Yeah.
And some people say like our Thanksgiving traditions are part of that, where it's like we kill one turkey so that like everyone can have peace and prosperity for the new year. But there is this like very much the symbol of like sacrificing one goat so that the community can go on. And she gave this example in defense of her defendant. She was just like, look, like let's let bygones be bygones. And it worked. I mean, it just, the jury kind of resonated with the symbol of like, at some point we have to let things go, right? Because right now, I mean, and we're making some progress. There's some cool legislation, or I guess, no, Supreme Court law that's come down that's saying, sentences, especially for juveniles that are 40 years to 120 years, like that's just not okay. We're not going to do that. And so we're reversing the trend on that to say like, we can't punish people for that long. Like punishment is important at times for people that need to be taught, but not that length. That just feels like too long. And so I think those kind of, I don't know, maybe religious or kind of restorative type principles are leaking into criminal justice. And so I'm trying to write about those things. I'm trying to study prisoners, but it's really hard. I think we started doing something in May, me, a professor and I, and we're still going through IRB approvals because to study prisoners is very hard because of some of the horrible experiments that happened on prisoners back in the day. So now it's very hard to study any prisoners. So I can't talk about my own kind of data yet or working with inmates, but that will be coming too.
Wow. So are you looking at our church culture or organization and seeing a lot of opportunity, like missed opportunity? Like what more could we be doing? Is that sort of, or are you just saying like, we're doing great? Like I'm seeing these general authorities, 70s, going to prisons.
I mean, there's always room for improvement. And I think, part of it starts from within. And I think I have so many stories of this, but I'll tell you one. So I had this great student in my BYU class this year. And I have to say this year, so after 15 years of teaching law, this year was transformative because my heart had changed, right? Like I had seen myself as an integrated whole. It's like, I'm not just like a bail scholar and a Christian. I'm like a Christian criminal justice person. And so how does Christ impact every single thing I do, right? It's like, I promise to love him with all my heart and my mind and my soul. It's like, what does that mean? Because it has to impact so my teaching this year was different. And also I got to be my whole self at BYU where I got to talk about faith. But I remember, my one student after a couple of months, he's like, you're always talking about mercy. And I'm like, yeah, I love it. I love mercy. And he's just like, well, is there any group of people that you punish more? Like thinking about criminal justice, like what group would you punish more than is currently being punished? And I went home and couldn't think, he kept reminding me about it. And I kept thinking, and eventually I turned around and said to him, people who abuse children. He's like, I was like, I have this like real anchor. And I think that, people, I never feel like that punishment's enough. And I felt good about that for a minute. But then after like a week or so, I was like, no, I had this anger, and I honestly haven't personally faced this, but I started praying. I was like, I have this like hatred, this like not love, right? For people who have been accused of sex crimes against children. Like, God, help me to feel this love. This I prayed for myself to just change. And so anyway, you wouldn't even believe it, but like people started coming out of the woodworks, like out of nowhere, like moms who've had their sons abuse children. And like talking to a mom and thinking about, I have boys, I have 3 boys, like thinking about my boys. Would I still love my boy if he abused a child? Like, of course I would. Would I want him to be punished and held accountable? Yes. But I also would want to not throw away the key like we talk about, right? And so, and then last week, actually, I think it was a week ago, I had the chance to go teach Sunday school at the transition branch for our church. So our church is so amazing. Like I was saying earlier, it's like, not only we have figured out ward systems and, trying to figure that out, we actually have a certain place where people that are released from prison can go to church because they can't go to a regular church because there's children there and they've been charged and released, and they are not allowed to be in places like a church or near a school due to their, important violations that they have done in the past. And so I went to teach there. And so most of the people that go to this branch are sex offenders. Wow. And it's like, God provided these opportunities. And I have to say, I felt, I've never been to a Sunday school that was more powerful spiritually. Like I've never learned more about the atonement in 1 hour. Wow. These people are repentant. They are full of so much love. I mean, they go to that ward every day. There's like 5 days a week they go to church because they're working on different things. And I'm like, how, and God taught me that, right? It's like, that's the kind of thing we need to change in the church. It's individual hearts like mine. When you think I would be the best, right? I know about criminal justice. I write about criminal justice defendants, but I had a carve out in my heart where it's like, not them. Only like some, it's like I was okay with some criminals, but not some of them.
Yeah, totally.
And,
I'm curious if you have a working definition of justice that you've gotten comfortable with, because I would say as a teenager, missionary, young person, very justice oriented. Like I saw God as, yes, a God of mercy, but primarily as he interacted with me, a God of justice.
Yes.
And then I think a lot of people maybe are like me in that they sort of like go through a pendulum swing maybe at some point, and they realize that God can't be that way. It doesn't work, and they will start to be very focused on mercy, and justice becomes very unpalatable. And this definitely happened to me, where there was a phase where I was all about mercy. Don't even talk to me about justice. Like I'm so tired of that. I don't need any more justice.
And I think there's a lot of people still there.
Absolutely. And then we read this book by Adam Miller, Original Grace, and he gave a definition for justice that finally worked for me to be able to integrate it again. And the paradigm shift was justice going from what is deserved to what is needed.
Oh, I love that.
And does that resonate with you in this work?
So much. And I think we grew up thinking of God as the just one that's going to throw the hammer down, and maybe Jesus a little bit more merciful. But as I get older and read more of the scriptures, it's like, actually, like Hebrews tells us they're one and the same in character. And the Book of Mormon too is very clear, like they're one in everything, purpose, character. And so God is both merciful and just. Right. And I think sometimes that mercy requires punishment. Right.
Exactly.
To teach you to be better.
Yes.
And I think I'm so grateful. Like I have this Dave DeRocher. Have you guys had him on your podcast?
Yes.
I love him.
He's amazing.
And I know you guys have Joseph Graney a lot on your conference, and I love him too. But he comes and he says like, and my students are always shocked. He's just like, I'm so grateful I was arrested for that 25th time where I got the opportunity to change. He's like, and he says Jesus Christ saved him. He says that. He says that Jesus Christ saved him because he believes that was like God's intervention. And so many people, I have, other people that say that the jail cell, their prison cell was this hallowed ground where people in prison, are told by their cellmate, hey, have you heard of Jesus? And then have this profound awakening. And so many people in prison, like there's so many stories I could tell you, but just such profound change because they realize that this God loves them even when they're being punished, right? And this woman I spoke to, she was reaching out about her son. He was about to get sentenced, and I'm thinking she's going to be like, well, can you help my son because you might know somebody, and it's a federal court, and I clerk for a federal judge, like maybe I know some people. And that's not what she was wanting though. She was just like, I just want him to have the punishment that he needs. Like she wasn't saying, can you figure out how to get him a lesser sentence? Because she knew that he needed that punishment. So I think justice and mercy are one. And I definitely think though, like overall our carceral system, we punish way too much and too long, but I don't think actually we punish enough people. So what's happening is, so there's lots of crimes committed. So you say like, millions of people are affected by crime. about 19 million or 20 million of people get away with crime every year. And that causes problems because when people aren't held accountable for their crimes, whether through punishment or drug rehab or whatever it is, then they continue to commit those crimes and then we're less safe. But if we have more certainty of punishment, right? Right now we have a great severity in punishment. That doesn't deter crime. But what does deter crime is certainty of punishment. If you knew, like in Singapore, if you drop your gum on the sidewalk, you're going to get in trouble. So no one does it. No one commits crime. Japan, I mean, another great example. They have such certainty that when you commit a crime, they'll catch you. We've gotten to be very severe and harsh in our punishment in the US. But we're also we're not even solving crimes that are important. Like we should solve every murder. We're only solving about 60% of them, right? Every rape, very few rapes are resolved and somebody held accountable. And then they continue to commit that crime. So I very much believe in justice, right? I think we should strive for a more perfect justice, which involves more people being found out and help to change, right? Like you said, it's like, it's that, what do we need? What do we need to do?
Exactly. So it becomes less about the retribution portion of justice.
Right.
This is why people get to restorative justice, I think, right?
That's right.
And like, so the result at the end of the day, it could be incarceration or fine or something else, right?
Yes.
It could, like, the result might end up being the same, but the reason you get there through what is needed might actually be very different.
And you think like our prisons, like about 40% of people are mentally ill in there. And then 85% are either addicted to drugs or were on drugs or alcohol while they're committed their crime. That's a lot of people. 60% actually addicted to drugs. So you think 60% addicted to drugs, 40% mental illness, like a lot of them need help. And not to say like some of them need punishment too, right? Which might involve kind of keeping them away a lot, definitely keeping away from people. But in the 70s, so this is an interesting thing that criminal people know, but I think the vast majority of the population doesn't know, is like in the 70s, nationwide, just through budget cuts, we shut down our mental institutions. And as you notice in the 70s and 90s, like prison numbers went up because there just like wasn't a place to put people that are mentally ill that are, and you go to these, like even the prison branch that our church has, like a lot of people are just mentally like, challenged. Like they're just not in a place where they commit a crime and you like, I just know God's looking at them and not holding them as accountable as somebody who is, completely with all their mental facilities. And so anyway,
So some of this is it feels a little philosophical in some ways. Like you might not even as a member of the church who shows up on a Sunday, like you almost like don't have to make decisions about that. And it's like, I think it's important to start examining in ourselves, but especially for the way that it informs our own fear and anger. And so that feels like a really valuable thing to start thinking about. But I would love for you to just talk about the way you see that fear showing up, because if I'm being really honest, I think what happens is like we have this sort of like Romney-esque picture of what a Mormon family looks like, right? Like that can feel like a comfortable,
I've never heard that term
feeling.
before.
I think I just made it up. I it's a joke almost.
They are a beautiful family.
They are.
But I think just culturally, especially in the United States, there's this idea that we look clean cut and put together and polite and nice. And so I feel like the real like experience on a Sunday when somebody is in your ward who does not fit that part, like who is showing up, maybe they were incarcerated or in the middle of this, they just don't look the same. Like maybe you're seeing tattoos on their face, tattoos on their neck. It's the uncomfortable part of this conversation because the real experience on a Sunday, I think, is that a lot of people are going to feel fear and they're going to lean away and they're going to be nervous that, I don't know, something's going to happen at testimony meeting or like, and we just like don't know how to do this well. And I feel so inspired and excited about this other vision that you're creating, which feels like real Christianity to me. But I would love for you to talk about like that Sunday experience of seeing a new member of the ward and being honest, maybe if you have that impulse to step away or lean away or be careful.
I mean, I think, like you said, a lot of us go to church where we don't see people with face tattoos or neck tattoos or that look different than us. I mean, arm tattoos. I have a good friend who has arm tattoos and he passes the sacrament every week in his ward. And in the summer, he has to be asked because they're both naked women on his arms. And so, they kindly be like, when you're standing with the deacons, like maybe you should cover your arms. And he totally gets it. He does it. And he's great. But it's like, all of us don't have exposure to that friend of mine. You know, his name's Anthony. I love him. But it's like we need more of that, because I think the exposure gives you more familiarity. And I think I remember even just like taking away from criminals, like when I came to BYU, people would look at me and they're like, I'd never like seen anyone like you almost.
Really?
Right. Well, they'd be like, well, where are you from? And why don't you have an accent? And, you know, and in New York where I grew up, it was like, there was lots of people that looked like me, but some people. And so of course, as a kid, I was annoyed, but now I just like appreciate it. It's like, okay, good. Let's figure this out. And I've even had friends almost describe exactly what you described to me, which complaining. They're like, these missionaries, our missionaries, right?
Yeah.
In a big city are bringing in people that have neck tattoos and face tattoos. Can you believe it? And I'm like crying, like, really? They are? I'm so happy because missionaries, as we know, right? They're full of the light of Christ, and whoever will accept it, we want all of them in, and we do. And, you know, from the top, it's like the Church of Joy, like, let's be happy. Let's treat every visitor with love. And I think we can do better at that. I think some Christian churches are a little more organized in that capacity of like, how do we get used to visitors coming? You know, I think we're often just not used to visitors coming, that many of them, at least maybe in some of our wards. I think in inner cities, it happens all the time. When I was in Harlem, it's like we had visitors all the time, and they would get up and bear the testimonies, and it was different. But I think just being prepared for that, like people that don't look like us, that have a different background than us, like actually treating them like Christ would, like with the kind of love that he would, and just being open to that. I think that's something definitely like we need to work on. I need to work on as I talk to you about my own.
Yeah, I love that. It's like a manual override. Like I choose to lean into the situation. Like this is good.
Yes, this is a good thing. Like, and I was even thinking, it's like there's a great book, Tattoos on the Heart, where he talks about where, you know, the people come to church like homeless and they smell a certain way. You know, when you haven't bathed or had been, you know, proper home for a while, you're going to smell a certain way. And it's like, that would be ideal if our churches smelled like that. Like I was just thinking today, I was like, if we had people that look different, obviously, if they, you know, people that smell differently, like they didn't have the abilities. And, you know, I don't live in a neighborhood that there are homeless people right now, but in New York City, you do. And so, you know, there are places where they would be able to, you know, we'd all go to church together. And I think thinking about that as our ideal of having people that look different than us, that smell different than us, that, you know, might have gotten drunk last night, but they're still at church. Like that's the gospel. And and you think about Jesus, like who is he spending time with? It's people that smell different, cast out, right? Look different, violent.
Yeah. I'm wondering, so this is my 1950s white male Mormon coming out, but I'm wondering if there's like a way to like, and this could just be like a deep rooted misconception that I have, but well, we saw the play The Book of Mormon a few weeks ago. Maybe we shouldn't talk about this.
Why? What is this play? Oh, that show.
That show.
You saw that? Okay. I've seen it too. It's horrible.
Okay. But like, there is this thing, well, the cast of missionaries, you do fall in love with them immediately because they're like so clean cut and so innocent and fun or whatever. So the point is that there may be something to like a societal perception of Mormons as trustworthy and the clean cut, recently showered thing like contributes to that. And so I'm wondering if that might be okay as a way, as sort of like just this funny and good thing that Mormons do, but also completely and fully accept people that do not fit that mold. Is that a possibility, or do we, you know, do we just need to let go of that aspiration entirely? I'm not quite sure.
This was a new thing for me because, you know, coming to Utah, the East Coast is different culturally. So even just kind of you know, we made the not Wall Street Journal, we made the Washington Post this week because of this idea of perfection amongst, you know, Latter-day Saint women. And there is more of that. And culturally, I think not in the church, but almost like in these states, like Arizona, California, Utah. I don't even think it's just LDS people, but people are just more done up and their hair's perfect and they look perfect. Whereas like going to the store in New York with no makeup on, your hair not done, and, you know, sweatpants is like totally acceptable. Like, in fact, it's, you know, welcomed. So it was just kind of, it's culturally different. I think because there's so many LDS people in these parts, that's maybe what it comes down to. I don't see that ever preached at church though. I think it's almost like people see LDS people and they look blonde and pretty and they have their makeup done, and you know, it's like they look at me and they're like, you're not LDS. So people will say things to me like that. Really? They assume I'm not. All the time because I don't look like, you know, maybe they think, but I think you're right. I think there is room to kind of open that, and I think you know, I there's so much out there, and maybe we just need to get more access to information about that, but there are bishops, right, currently serving that I know that have been homeless, addicted to drugs. Now they're bishops of wards, right?
Yeah.
And Bishop Ricks, stake president. There's a stake, a guy holding an important stake calling that I know, who when I sat down to him, I said, how'd you meet your wife? And he's like, well, when I was addicted to crack. And I was like, wait, what?
Yeah.
And he didn't know I was a criminal law professor. So I got really excited. And of course, 2 hours later, you know, I hear about how he got addicted to crack and drugs and got off drugs through faith and, you know, all this amazing stuff. And so I'm like, and he's serving in a stake calling. And so maybe we just don't know it, because I think one of the things I think, you know, maybe I even struggle with, and I think my ward and other wards do, is like, I think sometimes we don't talk about our past. Like everyone has things that they might have, you know, errors that they've made that they feel like, well, this doesn't fit, so I won't talk about it. But I think maybe we have more people serving these callings than we think, but we just don't talk about those things that they struggled with or they suffered from. For, I don't know, maybe we're afraid to share those and other people will look down on us. And that's more of a condemnation on us. It's like, why are we judgmental that we don't want a bishop that used to be addicted to drugs?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Like,
are there things that you would want people to know? Like if you were teaching a Sunday school class or a Relief Society class and you wanted people to buy in to this Christianity looking like this, genuinely delighting and welcoming visitors and gathering people who are on the margins in this way too. And just going out and doing things that don't feel so tidy. Like it's just like, it's uncomfortable because you have to kind of figure out how to do this on your own. What is the thing that you would want people to understand? If you know that there's some trepidation and you want them to buy in, like what have you learned all of these years working with people who are incarcerated? Or
so good. I mean, I would say to them, like, do you believe in Jesus Christ? And then 2, do you believe in the Book of Mormon? Because if you believe in those 2 things and study them at any length, you know, I'll tell you one story about Jesus. I mean, one of the best stories about Jesus is basically where we don't talk about it in these terms because it's in the New Testament church, but he basically shows up on a prison. So in Matthew 8, it talks about he shows up and these 2 guys in a cave. One of them's naked. They're both chained up, right? They have demons, quote unquote, but nowadays it's like mental illness. They're mentally ill. They've been violent. They've hurt people, and the community's put them in this jail. And what's crazy about the story, and it's in 3 of the Gospels, which I like to see, like, how many of the Gospels talked about it? How important was it? This is in 3 of the Gospels, just like the Great Commandment, also in 3 Gospels. Like, this is important. Wow. So what we learn from this story is, this is the guy, right? Jesus then comes, says, what's your name? Your name's Legion. And all the demons are cast out of him going into the pigs. And we always remember the pig part because that sounds really fun. But that's the guy with the pigs. But what's important about that is the community in that community, they say to Jesus, like, go away. They tell Jesus to go away. It's the only time I've ever seen in the Gospels where they tell Jesus, we're afraid, like, go away. And this guy, we don't want him because he's like the people we cast out in prison. And Jesus says no. And he could have easily rescued this guy and said, come with me, because he was really ready to follow. And Jesus says, no, you must stay and show them that I had compassion on you. And he stays and preaches. And it says, you know, everyone round about learns and is changed by this. Like, I think that's what Jesus wants us to do. Wow. He wants us to be changed by the people that we're casting out, the ones that we think aren't good enough, the ones that we chain up in a cage and lock away the key. Yeah. And so, I mean, so do you believe in Jesus Christ? Then you want to do this work too. And then second, the Book of Mormon, I think, you know, our Christian friends who I love, they're missing such an amazing book that really teaches us kind of how to get to the next level on treating people as Christians, because not only do we get that interpersonal relationship like you do in the New Testament, Christ interacting with people, which is critical, but we have the Book of Mormon. It's like, you know, bird's eye view of civilizations and their wars. And, you know, when are they getting along? When are they Christ-like? Well, it's when they don't have anyone in prison. It's when they're getting married to each other. There's no violence against women or children, right? There's no politics. There's no you know, these are things like we look at this and we read it as this nice thing, but it's like, do we actually believe this? Do we believe this is a book for our time that's going to change us? Because if we do, we'll learn from the people and what they did. And one of the best stories is the Gadianton robbers, where, I mean, it tells you specifically, like, they're mass murderers, conspirators, rapists, because it talks about them taking women away. And then they're put in prison and punished, right? Justice. But then it says after they're punished, those that are willing to change, those that are willing to covenant to not do that again, the people remove them out. And these are the people right before they're preparing to meet Christ. They're righteous. They let them come out. They give them land to work on. I mean, this is an approach, right? You think about restorative justice. Like, how do we get this done? It's through the Book of Mormon, right? It's following these ways. Like, yes, punishment, right? Let's lock them up. They defeated the Gantiarawas and put them in prison. But those that are willing to change, let's give them a chance, right?
Yeah.
They don't need 60 years to change. If they're going to change, like, they might be able to change sooner. And maybe some people do need longer, but I just think there's like, we have these recipes. And I think, people that are of our faith, and including myself, it's like, we know we believe in Jesus Christ. Yeah. We want to be like him. We covenant to do so. Every day when we put our garments on, anytime we take the sacrament, but do we really want to be like him? Because it's uncomfortable.
Yeah. Jesus was radical.
Radical.
Yeah.
He is radical.
Yeah. We have, this theological groundwork, scriptural groundwork to get us there. So if somebody's listening to this and saying, okay, I want to do more here with this type of work specifically, like what are like 2 or 3 really practical things you think somebody could take away from this?
I mean, kind of look at, if you're wanting to do on the policy side, you can look at leaders that are doing work in this area. It's funny because, I have friends of both sides, but I'm kind of equal opportunity on this issue because there's some Democrats and some Republicans that do really good work on criminal justice. Like, for instance, Mike Lee in Utah has done amazing work on criminal justice, like single-handedly reduced prison sentence for people over 60, reduced drug sentences federally, but just kind of be open to people on both sides of the aisle that might be doing work in this space. A lot of Christian groups that might be more on the right are doing really cool work. So if you want to get involved in this, and I think it should be more both sides, right? I think on the left it's often secular, but I think just being open to that, I think that's a practical thing, like being open to both parties, trying to not worry about that piece of it. But there's lots of volunteer opportunities. Like, you can go to prisons and visit people. I'm sure everyone, if you don't know someone that is in prison, like, I'll give you somebody to go visit, to write. There's letters you can write. I can give you, if people want to reach out to me, I can give you like ways to write letters, to visit. There's 2 internet sites, God Behind Bars Prison Ministry. People maybe that aren't of our faith or can't get involved locally, they can go on those. There's ways to donate money. There's ways to send Bibles, and so there's so many things you can do to help people incarcerated.
And are there formalized court watching programs here in Utah?
That I've heard of in Salt Lake City, but I haven't been in touch with the people to know how much it's happening. But supposedly there is. I haven't been working with them on that.
And it sounds like maybe your stake is like, it's very possible you get to start right at home and find out if there's a ministry going on within your stake that you may just not be aware of.
But I think, Christ specifically calls out prisons when he says visiting the sick, clothing the naked. He talks about prisons. And I think that's really interesting, of all the things he could have brought. And back then they didn't even have the prison issues that we have today, right? They didn't have, and I was thinking, when I was presenting at the Sunday school class at the prison, it occurred to me as I was driving out with my husband, I said to him, like, if Jesus was to worship was to show up at any church, like, where would he show up? Like, I think high likelihood he'd either be hanging out with the homeless people, right? Or he'd be in the prisons, or, who are the people that really like need him and are open and willing to listen to him? I think he'd be in jail. That's the kind of thing. And we have full services in jails, in our church, but also other churches. But anyway, I just think those are,
love that. Don't
you think he would be there?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And I thank you so much for this. I also just feel like in any relationship where you feel some resistance or tension or something, it feels like there's always a point in the relationship where you finally get to something that just feels lovable. Like in no matter who it is, it just seems like at some point you're able to just finally hit a thing that is so true. You just can only feel compassion. And it feels like this is just such an opportunity to lean in a little bit to a place that might feel uncomfortable and find out where you can find like real, honest, deep compassion and Christ-like love for people who may not have a life that looks exactly like yours. And so I love that all of these invitations, and it really feels like there's just so many ripe opportunities for us to be a little bit more like Jesus.
And I think I would add to that, like, look within yourself. Cause I think for me, like I another confession of sin here from Shima, but I was recently giving a talk to my stake about mercy. They asked me to come, stake conference or whatever, like a little 10-minute talk about mercy. And as I'm preparing this talk, like, I realized I have this conversation with my husband, and there's somebody that we both know that has harmed somebody we know. And like, I have felt like anger in my heart toward this person. And an issue came up with this person with my husband. And as we were talking about it, like, he says to me, well, don't you have mercy for this person too? And in my mind, I was like, I had excluded this person as like I had a carve out, and I don't know. And I brought it up to a friend. This realization I had with her as I was writing this talk, I was like, I had this carve out, and she had a similar type of situation in her family. And I said, what about you? And she's like, it hadn't even occurred to me to have mercy on this person. Like, I just think sometimes, we're even okay, like having mercy on the incarcerated or the homeless but not for the people that we feel like you knew better, right? And you hurt somebody I know, and you did this thing, and we like hold these hatreds. But if we're like Christ, like he tells us, like your job is to forgive everyone. I can decide who to forgive, but we have to be merciful to all. And so it was just like another kick in the pants, like, Shima, like, because we do this. Like, I think it's easier for me now to love sex offenders than it is to like love this person that, harmed a friend of mine.
Wow.
Right. And we have these carve outs. And I think when we do have this carve out in our hearts where we allow a little hate to get in there, I think Satan just abuses that and takes over. And I think we can't have a heart full of Christ, a heart loving like he wants us to have, if we save these points. So I think the most practical thing for me, it's like, evaluate my heart. And if there's any carve outs, anyone, right? And somebody, and a lot of people come back with me and they're just like, well, what about victims of crime? It's like, yes, it is so horrible. And, as somebody who's experienced crime myself, like I've been robbed at gunpoint, knife point. In Africa, my house was burglarized. Like I've gone through a lot of different crimes, other more kind of like, I guess, personal crimes that I don't talk about. And so I get that. Like it's not like I'm saying like victims go away, like I know that all of us, our paths are through Christ to find healing. And I think Christ only understands those victims' wounds. But so I'm not saying like people should not be punished or that victims don't have a right to be angry. But we're taught that, to get charity and the pure love of Christ, which is like what we need to fill our hearts with, to get those carve outs out. It's a gift. And that's what gives me so much hope. Cause I'm like, I can't earn charity. I can't gain it. I can't like create charity. I have to, God has to give me that charity. And so that's what I pray for. It's like, that's how I got this, my heart full circle on sex offenders. And, and I'll have to continue to do that. Cause it's not like you get pure love of Christ and you're like, check. Right. For me, it's like constantly, I have to seek that.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's perfect, Shima.
Yeah. Thank you so much. I think that's a really powerful place to end. That at the end of the day, this is about our hearts expanding and getting that gift of charity so that we can feel where we're being called. It feels like once you have that, then you get some clarity about where that charity should move you to.
Yes. So. And I think only Christ can take away the hate and the anger. Like only him. It's a gift. Yeah. And so I think that's what I need to remind myself is like, I don't need to hold on to that anger. I can give it to him and he does take it away. He'll find ways there's so many different things where I pray for like, help me God to do this and he'll provide a way. It's like here, all the time.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Shima.
You guys are amazing. Thank you so much. Seriously.
All right. Thanks so much for listening. We really hope that you enjoyed this conversation with Shima Baradaran Baughman. You can find links to all of the books that Shima mentions in this conversation in the show notes if you're interested. And we would love to hear from you. You can always email us at info@faithmatters.org, or you can rate and review us wherever you listen to podcasts. We read all of the reviews, and it really helps us to get the word out about Faith Matters, and we appreciate the support. Thanks again for listening, and remember, you can check out more at faithmatters.org.